They said corruption hides in shadows, in narrow alleys, whispered exchanges, backroom deals under flickering neon signs. They said it lurks in cheap motels, in rundown bars where smoke clings to the ceiling and desperation stains the walls. They were wrong. Corruption does not hide. It dresses with dignity. It wears a robe. It signs judgments with a steady, rehearsed hand. It attends charity galas, delivers speeches about ethics, shakes hands with schoolchildren, and receives applause as if the applause were cleansing. And through it all, corruption smiles, calm, practiced, polished, while a nation slowly, quietly suffocates under its weight. This story does not begin in the darkness of a city street. It does not begin under a bridge or in a dim garage. It begins behind the polished stone doors of American justice, the very place people are taught to trust without question. 5:42 a.m., Maricopa County, Arizona. The desert was still, the air unmoving, as if the entire landscape were holding its breath. A silence so heavy it pressed against the skin. The kind of silence that knows something catastrophic is seconds away. Something that will split the morning open. Then it happened. The fracture. A steel ram hammered into the front door of a hillside mansion overlooking Phoenix. The door shattered like dry bone, exploding in a burst of wood and metal. Boots thundered through the marble foyer, echoing off high ceilings and glass staircases. Agents moved with precision, their shadows cutting across expensive art and designer furniture. Inside this home, immaculate, expensive, sterile, lived a man who had sworn, publicly and repeatedly, to defend the law. His name? Judge Rowan Maddox. A man celebrated in televised interviews, praised in legal circles, respected as a voice of authority and integrity. His secret, 20 pounds of high-purity heroin sealed behind the drywall of his luxury estate, not hidden in a cartel warehouse, not buried in a desert bunker, hidden in the home of a federal judge. This was not a cartel compound. This was a judge's sanctuary, converted into a private narcotics vault, protected by the illusion of law. This was not corruption creeping in from the outside. This was rot erupting from the core of the system itself, a quiet infection that had been allowed to grow in the very institution meant to stop it. What investigators uncovered that morning sent shockwaves through federal offices from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. In hallways of granite and glass, phones rang non-stop. Supervisors whispered. Directors demanded updates. The scale of the betrayal was too large, too calculating, too deliberate. Behind smiling family photos, framed degrees, and awards for excellence in public service, agents discovered a meticulously constructed false wall. Behind it, a sight that froze the entire entry team. Perfectly aligned bricks of heroin, each stamped with the insignia of a South American cartel. Vacuum-sealed stacks of cash totaling $2.4 million, neatly arranged in rows like museum pieces. A rack of tactical rifles, some military grade. Unregistered pistols with serial numbers filed off to nothing. A burner phone, unlocked, vibrating with a fresh message that had arrived seconds before the breach. Inside that phone, encrypted chats with one of the most feared cartel figures in the Western Hemisphere. A ghost known only as Mar Escarlata, the Scarlet Sea. A man whispered about in border task forces and intelligence briefings. These messages were not threats. They were not warnings. They were instructions, cold, clinical, precise. Shipment windows, police deployment schedules, court rulings timed strategically to create safe corridors for narcotics, opening pathways the same way engineers open floodgates before a river breaks. This was not bribery. This was partnership. Not a backdoor favor, not a discreet envelope under a table, but a fully formed alliance between a federal judge and a cartel empire operating thousands of miles away. A judge who didn't just look the other way. A judge who designed the way. A federal judge moonlighting as a cartel strategist. A man who could manipulate the system from behind the curtain, shifting court calendars, reshaping outcomes, adjusting deadlines and rulings with the precision of a surgeon cutting away obstacles. A man who understood the machinery of justice so intimately that he knew exactly which gears to jam, which levers to pull, and which blind spots the system wouldn't notice until it was too late. If you are still reading, you already sense it. This was never about one man, one house, one hidden wall of drugs. This was about how deep the infection had spread, how far the roots reached beneath the floors of American institutions. When agents followed the money, the illusion of legitimacy collapsed instantly, not with a bang, but with a quiet, horrifying clarity. Forensic accountants traced $44.1 million, laundered through 52 shell companies spread across Nevada's strip malls, Belize's beachfront consultancies, and Curaçao's sun-bleached office blocks. There were no buildings, no desks, no employees, no products, just immaculate paperwork printed on premium stock, designed, engineered, perfected to bleach blood-soaked money until it gleamed like clean, respectable profit. And it worked, flawlessly, until the morning when the desert silence finally broke. Funds from South American front companies flowed into Maddox-controlled investment firms across Arizona. On paper, real estate ventures, infrastructure development, agricultural expansion. In reality, a conveyor belt for cartel capital, moving billions through financial arteries disguised as legitimate enterprise. Then came the message, the single line of text that froze the entire task force in place. Push 42 loads this quarter. Same lanes, no patrol disruption. Short, cold, mechanically confident. Each load ranged from 55 to 130 pounds. The math struck like a hammer, nearly a full ton of heroin and fentanyl quietly flooding the American Southwest, sanctioned by the same man who lectured law students about ethics and constitutional duty. Investigators dug deeper and found coded calendar entries masquerading as ordinary civic life. Lunch meeting, charity dinner, golf review. But the invitations told the truth. 9 county officials and 4 senior law enforcement officers. Ties, connections, quiet favors traded in the shadows of country clubs and city halls. Total payoff, $9.1 million. The price of silence, the price of betrayal, the price of a nation's slow poisoning. This was not the collapse of justice. This was the construction of a shadow judiciary, where verdicts were purchased, corridors for narcotics cleared, and the machinery of death given right of way. If you believe this story needs to reach people, hit like, comment justice, and let the algorithm carry into daylight what others tried to bury. Because the next phase is where the government strikes back, not softly, not politely, but with surgical force. When the evidence against Judge Rowan Maddox grew too massive to bury, the Department of Justice activated Operation Red Meridian, a coordinated multi-state strike meant to sever the cartel's American bloodstream in one violent sweep. Dawn, Thursday. 8 states ignited at once: Arizona, Nevada, California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Utah, Oregon. In Yuma, unmarked SUVs rolled past rust-flaked hangars and silent warehouses half swallowed by desert dust. Inside one, industrial packaging machines, scorched heating plates, open chemical drums, and ledgers stamped with maritime codes from Puerto León, Venezuela. When the steel doors detonated inward, agents surged through the smoke like wraiths, silent, disciplined, lethal. And that was only the opening act. Shouts ricocheted across concrete. Suspects sprinted toward loading docks, but drones circling overhead collapsed the perimeter like a trap snapping shut. Within minutes, resistance imploded. Houston, a bland industrial suite wearing the disguise of a janitorial company. Inside, a repackaging hub engineered for efficiency. The fluorescent lights were still buzzing when agents breached. 2 armed guards bolted toward the gravel lot. They did not make it 20 feet. The gravel barely shifted beneath their boots before the canine units hit them, a hurricane of muscle, teeth, and unstoppable momentum. One guard screamed. The other didn't have time. The dogs brought them down with the precision of weapons honed by training and instinct. By nightfall, 73 arrests, $12 million seized, dozens of locations compromised, and one question that hollowed out every agent who stood in the desert dusk. How many more judges are out there wearing the robe, holding the gavel, and quietly serving the cartel? They thought the raid was over. They thought the nightmare had peaked. They were wrong, because what came next revealed a truth far more terrifying than individual corruption. The infection had not entered the system had been feeding it. Inside the warehouses, investigators found something far worse than narcotics. They found infrastructure, industrial, methodical, unapologetic. The kind of infrastructure that does not appear overnight. The kind that requires permits, power, protection, and silence from officials who should have been defending the public. rows of precursor barrels stacked like industrial tombstones, blue plastic drums sealed tight with chemical sludge that could melt skin, scales dusted with toxic residue, as if each measurement left behind a ghost, ventilation ducts stained with chemical vapors, air so thick with fumes it clawed at throats and burned eyes, forcing agents to mask up or choke. This wasn't distribution. This wasn't smuggling. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was manufacturing, established, protected, thriving on American soil, under the guardianship of people sworn to fight it. But the most violent confrontation did not erupt in the Southwest. It detonated in central New Jersey, in a trucking distribution hub that to any passerby looked like another slice of blue-collar Americana. Rusted fencing, long-haul rigs, workers in reflective vests. Inside, it was something else entirely. A full-scale cartel command post. When federal teams stormed the loading floor, workers dropped clipboards and scattered like startled birds through aisles of diesel haze and cold steel. Engines roared, forklifts screeched, trailer doors slammed shut in panic. Boots hammered against concrete. Chaos, but tightly contained chaos, as federal precision tightened around the site like a closing noose. One suspect tried hiding inside a refrigerated container, thinking he'd freeze out the thermal scanners. He didn't. Thermal imaging burned through the darkness and found him in 90 seconds. Across 7 states, the seizures climbed with brutal mathematical clarity. 1.8 metric tons of narcotics, fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine variants. 312 firearms, most with serial numbers meticulously ground off. $142 million in cash, gold, bonds, and liquid securities. Encrypted tablets, burners, and routing ledgers. And the shock that reshaped the narrative entirely. 21 government and law enforcement officials found on the cartel's payroll, their names printed neatly in ledgers like employees of the month. But the most chilling revelation wasn't what was trafficked, it was what was documented. In a locked Newark back office, agents cracked open a reinforced steel filing cabinet. Inside, folders of payment schedules, coded wire instructions, drop point lists, meeting logs, all organized with obsessive, almost ritualistic precision. One sheet froze the entire room. Block letters, written in thick pen. Maddox guarantees clearance. Do not deviate. That was the moment the scandal stopped being a scandal and became revelation. When the public saw what Operation Red Meridian had excavated from beneath the nation's foundations, the reaction detonated coast to coast. These were not street-level gangsters, not nameless smugglers drifting in from distant shores. They were administrators, inspectors, officers, men and women embedded deep inside the machinery of American civic life, turning gears that were never meant to be touched by criminal hands. Communities woke to the whirring of news helicopters circling industrial zones, flashing lights outside courthouses, emergency press conferences filled with phrases no American ever expected or wanted to hear. Systemic infiltration, coordinated breach, internal compromise. Not the vague bureaucratic warnings the public had grown numb to. These were admissions, blunt, raw, unavoidable, that the system itself had been violated from within. The real shock was not that the cartel had reached America. The real shock was that America had opened the door, stepped aside, and watched it walk in, escorted by the very institutions sworn to repel it. As evidence poured in like floodwater through cracked concrete, washing away every comforting illusion, one truth stood unbroken. The illusion of a lone, corrupt judge was dead. This was no anomaly. This was architecture, a deliberate blueprint of power, privilege, and betrayal, engineered from deep inside the foundation of government itself. Handshake deals disguised as routine approvals, quiet nods exchanged across mahogany conference tables, email trails, ledger entries, encrypted messages, all stitching together a shadow economy threading through government buildings, pulsing like a second, secret bloodstream running parallel to the legitimate one. For years, no one saw it. No one questioned it. No one dared to. But now, everyone saw it. And no one could unsee it. A sheriff's deputy in Fulton County receiving consulting payments on the first of every month. Payments that never left a paper trail except in offshore databases. A zoning commissioner in Jacksonville approving riverfront leases so perfectly timed with cartel shipping arrivals, It was as if he had the schedules pinned inside his skull. A procurement officer in Chicago fast-tracking inspection waivers for cargo shipments at the exact hour fentanyl crates entered the port under forged manifests. The math did not wobble. The math did not hesitate. The math did not lie. $8.3 million in bribes and facilitation fees traced across 5 years. 12 police officers now under active internal investigation. 3 municipal contractors exposed as logistical intermediaries. The ones who physically moved the merchandise, signed the invoices, greased the gears. Multiple court filings flagged for suspiciously accidental dismissals, each one tied to cartel-linked defendants whose charges vanished like fog before sunrise. The betrayal was not merely financial, it was moral, it was foundational. These were not men who took a quick cash drop to look away for a night. These were sworn guardians who protected the entire network, who ensured heroin and fentanyl could pour directly into schools, hospitals, neighborhoods. They breathed life into the very addiction they condemned in speeches, vigils, and funerals. And when the truth finally ruptured, the nation cracked open with it. In Atlanta, under storm-gray skies, citizens gathered outside the courthouse with signs that sliced the air like blades. If the law becomes criminal, what justice remains? Some demanded resignations, others demanded arrests, others demanded answers, but most simply stood in silence, hollow, stunned, unable to reconcile the polished images of respected officials with the monstrous reality unfolding in brutal detail on their screens. Inside government buildings, order collapsed like a structure struck at its foundations. 2 county sheriffs forced to resign in the span of a single afternoon. A Savannah City Council trapped in a 9-hour closed session that spiraled into shouting matches behind paper-thin walls. A police union in New Jersey issuing a desperate midnight statement calling the scandal a catastrophic breach of oath. But even as outrage roared across the country, resistance simmered beneath it. Officials whispered behind closed doors that the federal government had overreached. A word chosen carefully, soft enough to sound procedural, sharp enough to plant doubt. They said the raids were excessive, premature, politically motivated. They said the timing was suspicious. They said the evidence was being interpreted too broadly. Politicians, eager to protect their own alliances and shadows, claimed the raids were timed distractions meant to manipulate the news cycle. They wagged fingers at podiums, blaming agendas, blaming optics, blaming anything except the rot beneath their feet. Their voices shook, not with conviction, but with fear of what else might surface. Press briefings morphed into gladiator arenas, half fury, half denial, and all fear. Journalists shouted, officials dodged. Reporters demanded transparency, as spokespeople insisted on ongoing investigations and classified details. Every camera in the room captured not clarity, but panic stitched beneath professional smiles. Meanwhile, in quiet, windowless rooms lit only by the cold glow of monitors, FBI analysts traced digital lines across national maps. Each line connected 2 names. Each name connected another. Node after node pulsed red, until the screen resembled an infection blooming under an X-ray. What emerged was no longer a list of suspects, but a lattice of loyalty and betrayal. A spider web of complicity stretching from municipal back offices to gleaming federal courts. A network so deliberate, so interconnected, so intact that the corruption could not be written off as a few bad apples. And at its blackened center stood the man whose fall had pulled the entire structure down with him, Judge Rowan Maddox, now held without bail, charged not merely with corruption, but with engineering treason from inside the very system sworn to protect the public. They expected outrage when he was marched past reporters. They expected screaming, a defiant declaration of innocence. They expected denial, the classic final stand of the corrupt. They expected chaos, anything to reclaim control of the narrative. They got something far, far worse. Silence. He did not shout, did not argue, did not plead his case to the cameras. He simply lowered his head. And in that quiet, unguarded second, the nation felt something colder than anger. Realization. This was never about one corrupt official. It was never about one secret, one bribe, one betrayal. It was about how far rot can travel once it finds a home inside the institution designed to stop it. By week's end, federal situation rooms abandoned speculation entirely. There were no theories left, only evidence, mountains of it. What began as a single suburban raid had erupted into one of the largest narcotics corruption investigations in modern American history. The evidence plastered across briefing room walls told a story too vast, too coordinated, too deliberate to deny. 1,809 metric tons of narcotics seized across connected operations, enough to drown entire cities in addiction for months. $144.4 million in frozen assets, duffel bags of cash, intercepted wire transfers, halted commodity trades, and 120 gold bars gleaming under sterile fluorescent light. 324 weapons, each tagged, photographed, and entered into evidence. Pistols, rifles, tactical builds, tools forged for authority, repurposed into instruments of crime. But the most damning evidence wasn't metal or money. It was names. Names in ledgers. Names buried in encrypted chats. Names etched into municipal calendars. Names tucked inside government inboxes. Names appearing again and again, each one a fracture in the foundation. Each one a human moment when loyalty was sold, and justice was rewritten in silence. Federal prosecutors drafted indictments for 184 people. Traffickers, brokers, police officers, city employees, clerks, inspectors, bureaucrats who had once sworn the same oath, and then gutted it for profit. Some cracked in hours, spilling secrets in exchange for mercy. They confessed to meetings, to instructions, to cash envelopes slid across desks. Others stared through interrogation glass in total silence, unblinking, unmoving, as if already accepting their fate. A few insisted it was all coincidence, clerical errors, mistimed meetings, misinterpreted signatures. But the data was louder than denial. The trail too linear, too consistent, too mathematically perfect. This wasn't hidden corruption. This was documented treason. Across affected states, the fallout split communities clean down the center. In some neighborhoods, the revelations only confirmed what people had long suspected, that an unseen hand had been guiding the chaos, the overdoses, the violence, the despair, that the sudden spikes in addiction, the inexplicable disappearances, the bursts of street-level brutality were not random surges of misfortune, but symptoms of a coordinated, invisible force pulling the strings. For others, the shock was seismic. Teachers, nurses, pastors, ordinary people who had once shaken hands with these officials, who had voted for them, who had trusted them to protect their families, now realized they had been living beside the very machinery poisoning their own streets. They had waved at these officials in grocery stores. They had seen them on local TV, and all the while, those same hands signing proclamations of public safety had been greasing the gears of a drug empire. Local governments buckled under the weight of exposure. Courtrooms emptied, their judges recused or removed. Special elections scrambled to fill sudden vacancies left behind by resignations, suspensions, or arrests. Auditors sifted through financial rubble, page by page, signature by signature, trying to rebuild trust one ledger at a time, knowing full well that trust lost is rebuilt slower than truth discovered. The conclusion became unavoidable. This was not incidental damage. This was structural decay, rot woven into the very beams of the system. Federal officials stayed measured, but unmistakably firm. They did not celebrate. They did not claim victory. Instead, they delivered a message chilled by honesty. This, they said, was not closure. It was the beginning of a purge, one network dismantled only to illuminate the next. The investigation would not take months. It could take years, possibly decades. And at the still rotten center of it all sat Judge Rowan Maddox, held without bail, his courtroom locked, his bench immaculate, two flags unmoved, frozen in the stale, conditioned air. A nameplate that once symbolized justice now whispered betrayal every time a reporter's camera swept across it. Through a lens, the room looked unchanged. The polished wood, the leather chairs, the raised dais. But anyone who knew what decisions had been bought behind that gleaming surface could never see it the same again. The nation was left with a brutal truth. Drugs do not enter cities by accident. They move through systems built, staffed, and guarded by people we are told to trust. And when that trust collapses, the poison does not flow from the streets upward. It flows from the top down. It is easy to blame the product, the heroin, the guns, the cash. But what this case revealed was something far deadlier, the quiet extinction of integrity. Because when the law itself becomes the courier, when the judge holds the door open, when the shield meant to protect the innocent becomes armor for the guilty, no amount of enforcement can repair what has already been lost. It wasn't just heroin hidden behind the wall. It was trust, packaged, priced, and sold. And that is the real cost, not measured in pounds or dollars, but in faith. Faith in institutions, in fairness, in the idea that justice stands above profit or power. When that faith collapses, families unravel, communities decay, entire generations grow up believing justice is an illusion, that influence is the only real currency, and the law exists only for those who cannot afford to escape it. And yet, even in the wreckage, something endured. Agents who still rise before dawn, analysts who chase every dollar until the digital trail ends, citizens who refuse to stay silent, even when silence would be easier. Because corruption thrives in darkness, but accountability survives anywhere people choose to see. If you are still watching, still reading, still listening, you are part of that light. Comment, I see. If you refuse to look away, comment, justice. Share this story. Spread it. Expose it. Because silence is where corruption lives, and exposure is where it dies.